really what attracts me often. But this is going to be a little bit of a different talk in that I'm going to talk about the things that offer you a leg up to improve your odds of success. And I'm going to categorize these in these three different domains with these foundations, right? So organizational design, data design, I'm going to speak very briefly about, and then analytics design as well. Okay, so what's my story? Let me provide you a little backstory of what motivated me, kind of with the current writing that I'm doing and some of the research that I've done. So 10 years ago, Dell bought a software company I was working with, and I was actually brought on board about the same time of the acquisition. And so Dell, if you're not familiar, they're just a marketing, Michael Dell and the whole company, they're just a marketing machine, really. I'd worked for Texas Instruments. We competed with Dell. I really think that we probably had a better engineered product than Dell had with the laptop business, but they kicked our can. And they kicked our can because they were really good at marketing. They could spin, and market. And so, I mean, Dell could even make oatmeal sound sexy, quite honestly. So that was the first place that I kind of heard this soup. They were into big data at the time. That was the spinoff term that was so popular, and everything was going big, and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, well, you know, small data is still important. And by big data, do you mean technology like Hadoop and Spark, or do you mean big data in a different paradigm? Anyway, there was just a lot of hype going on, and Dell was a master of the original big data hype. And then I've been affiliated with Northwestern University and SMU and CUNY. And so they all had programs, and I was involved in their analytics programs. And then about 2015, roughly, there's a little bit of variance there, but for all three schools, they went from a master's in analytics to a master's in data science. Now, there were some curriculum changes in that, but a lot of it was just the name, right? Because analytics was somewhat passé, and data science was kind of the new term. So we see this shifting of terms, and I'm going to talk more about that. But I'm just kind of setting the story for what got me involved and interested me in this topic. Started doing some research. I mean, when you hear AI, you think that's something that's new or, you know, relatively new, but actually AI started in the 1950s, Dartmouth, in the 1950s. So, and then personally, I have a master's in data mining, and data mining was all the rage for a while. And then that kind of spun off because data mining didn't, you know, it got a little older, and then people were thinking, well, that's kind of like data dredging. And so machine learning kind of replaced that term. So you really don't hear much about data mining. You hear more about machine learning and AI and data science these days. Then there was another one. You don't need statistics. All you need is this new thing called machine learning, right? Well, you know, most people don't realize you can't do any machine learning without statistics, because the whole paradigm of statistics is taking a subset called a sample and using that sample to make inferences and create models for a future or existing population. So you can't even do machine learning without statistics. So this whole thing about statistics is dead. That kind of, being a statistician, that kind of ticked me off. But anyway, I wanted to kind of dispel some of the rumor there as well. So, and you know, there's a whole lot more here, right? So BI, business intelligence, there's decision support, there's visualization, optimization, et cetera. And there are differences in these terms, but most people don't realize the subtle nuances of the terms and everything. And so we're always looking for the killer app, the killer algorithm, and there is none. And in fact, one of my favorite theorems is the no pre-lunch theorem. It actually is in computer science, but it applies to machine learning and AI as well, in that there is no super killer app. There's no button that you push and it solves every problem. It's all about knowledge. And that's the reason places like Data Science Dojo come in because, you know, they train and teach people what's what, essentially. All right, so this is kind of we created a 3-book series, and it's all analytics is the main title, and the reason for that is I'll show you in a minute why we kind of came up with analytics as the overarching term, but it applies to AI and data science, machine learning, et cetera. And the first book is really about demystifying this whole field of all these different terms and all the soup that's involved there. And so, yeah, so I just started really thinking about what I just went through with the last slide a lot, the different problems. And this first book took about 6 years. It was about 6 years in the making. And, you know, again, I've been around for a long time, so I've been thinking about the shifts and that sort of thing, and did a lot of research. And so, and in the end, like I said, the book title was difficult. But again, out of all the terms, I think analytics is probably the overarching best term. And so all 3 books of this series it's analytics, and then they have different nuances. The first book is about really the hype and demystifying that hype, and then analytics literacy, right? Basic literacy for all this stuff. So we're about to get into some of that hype, some of those terms, but let's just pause for just a second and analyze why there is so much hype, right? So I don't know when the first time you heard we need to be data driven in your career. So maybe that's been a while ago. For me, it's 30 years ago. So we're still saying the same thing. We need to be more data driven. Along with that, we need cleaner data. That's another thing that I've heard for 30 years. So what's happened during all that, right? I remember a professor at Baylor say, you know, whenever you read something, you should say, why is this person lying to me? And I thought that was crazy, pretty cynical, but not really anymore. So, you know, and I'm not saying that any of these are necessarily good or bad. You know, there are reasons for it, but as objective, I mean, I like to think of any data scientist as someone that can be objective, right? So the whole idea behind data is, you know, it's not emotional. It's, you know, it is what it is, and hopefully it's factual. Sometimes it's not, but it represents the best truth that we have. Let me just put it that way. So again, none of these is good or bad, but it is. But we need to understand where some of this stuff is coming from. So again, so marketing hype. Why? Why do you see so much marketing hype? Because, you know, marketers have to have something new and sexy, right? So you don't sell data science. You now sell ultra data science, or you sell, instead of big data, you sell ultra big data or ultra AI or whatever. In other words, you have to change the terminology to make it sound like you're applying something new. You can separate yourself from everyone else. So that's kind of where the marketing hype comes from. The second thing is self-promotion, right? And, you know, I'm doing a bit of self-promotion right here, right? So I'm with you, and I hope you leave today with something meaningful, but, you know, I know I'm biased because I have my view, I have my experience, and that's what I'm sharing with you. So I know that I'm not 100% objective. I am a Bayesian as well, and so one of my things that I love about Bayesian, there's a Bayesian saying that says the only objective person is the person that knows that they're subjective. Let me say that again. The only objective person is the person that knows they are subjective. In other words, we know we have biases, and that makes us more objective than we would be otherwise. And then media hype, obviously, you know, same thing, right? You can't sell old news. You have to sell new news, you know, spectacular news. So, and the same thing happens for politicians, right? Um, Even the politicians that say that they're public health experts, but are really politicians, they're very biased. Um, so, anyway, okay. So, looking at some of the soup that we have out there, and the reason that we titled this "It's All Analytics" was because we were doing research. It doesn't take you very long to find, well over 100 analytics types out there. And so in the blue circles, you'll see different types of analytics. Some of these are functional, like visual analytics or predictive analytics. And then you have all the domain specific analytics like financial analytics or healthcare analytics. So, but they're all different types. And then you have, analytics that use data science techniques, machine learning techniques, AI, visual, BI, statistics, etc. So those terms are as well. But we put together well over 50 terms that we added to the book, and we could have gone on and on and on. But it seemed best to me that analytics was more encompassing, and that's the reason for the book title. So what should we do? Well, the first thing we should do is we should speak the same language. That's the reason data literacy is so important. And I love these two quotes, and I'll read the first, and you can go through the second one. But, imagine an organization where the marketing department speaks French, the product designers speak German, the analytics team speaks Spanish, and no one speaks a second language. That's essentially how a data-driven business function works when there is no data literacy, and that's Casey Panetta from Gartner. And the second quote is similar. It's by Valerie Logan, which I think it's the Data Lodge that Valerie's doing now, and she's trying to educate on literacy as well. So this is really important, right? I mean, how do you function as a business if you don't have at least a basic understanding? And that's my challenge. I think, or I would challenge you to have some basic data literacy where people are speaking. That's where, again, places like Data Science Dojo come in hand, because they help you speak a common language across different use cases, across different industries, et cetera. So we need that. And, this stat, 2020, 50% of organizations lack data literacy skills. I don't think that's probably moved very much. It's probably still 50% today. I don't think we've gone very far in the last 2 years. Looking at the other metrics that I'm very familiar with, we are making slow changes overall. Okay, so why is it important? Because it's really too broad. Analytics, again, we just talked about that quite a bit, depending on industry, the types of analytics that you're involved in, whether it be functional analytics where you're a practitioner in, say, predictive analytics, or prescriptive analytics, or visual analytics versus, a domain or industry where you're doing sports analytics or financial, et cetera. So it's really pretty broad, but we need a basic language that we can all speak. And number two, analytics is pervasive, right? It really hits every level or it needs to hit every level of the organization, and it's becoming more and more so. So, and it's hitting not only professionals, but even consumers. Even consumers are becoming pretty savvy on analytics as well. Number three, as I stated before, everyone has a bias, right? And so I've pretty much already said this already. I don't mean to be lying, and lying might be too strong. I'm biased, right? I have my opinion, so we just need to be smart about that and be an intelligent consumer of information, right? Whatever you read, whatever you see, you need to understand the biases that are coming at you. And so data literacy really helps you with that, because you understand and you can filter that information as it's coming across. And, you know, the bottom line is you don't have to be an expert in everything, right? So you can really start off just trying to get basic literacy, everyone in the organization with some sort of basic literacy, and don't panic, right? So it just takes a while, and just be patient and try to do what you can do. So why is this hard? This is a quote, and I'll give you a minute to look through this. This is a quote by Dr. John Cromwell. He wrote this actually as a foreword into one of our books. He's a brilliant surgeon, but he's also a great data scientist. And it's really rare to find physicians that are great data scientists, and we need more of them. But I love the quote, many who need to know don't even know what they don't know. I thought that was very poignant and something to point out. And so that's one of the things that makes it hard. And then silos is another thing that makes it hard. We'll talk a little bit about organizational structure in a minute, but most organizations are way too siloed. You have all the different functional units. You have marketing, finance, sales, logistics, order entry, whatever, you know, depending on the organization. But the cross-functional units don't speak often, and so that makes things difficult as well. So a few things that have been brought out by Howard Dresner, and he did, this comes a lot from a foreword that he did in one of our other books. And so he's kind of the developer of this idea of information democracy. He's been doing this, and he actually coined this term, I think, 30 years ago. And so information democracy, a world where everyone has timely, relevant, and actionable insights to carry out the task associated with their role and align them with the overarching strategy of the organization. So what he's talking about is making sure that everyone has the right information at the point of action within their work, right? And that's one of our goals, right? As data scientists, that's what we want to do, is make sure that we send the right information in the right context, in the right format, to the right people, wherever they might be within the organization. And you can see there that only 43% of the people think that they're actually getting the right information for decision making. And only a third of organizations claim high or extremely high data literacy, right? So, and then we come full circle, right? When we look at the last bullet there, clouding things is constant barrage of technologies, techniques, and buzzwords that bombard us each and every day. So really good points made by Howard Dresner. The next point is leadership. And, you know, like I said, I've got a whole lot to say about everything here, but let me just say that leaders really only have two principal jobs. It's really, that's it. They develop a strategy, right? And the strategy is really kind of what should we do? And of course that's simplifying, but you know, it really is. You know, they set the market, what market you go out after within your organization, what the organization is about, what its charter is, what it should be doing, and then how do you do it? How do you get it done is actually, or I shouldn't even say necessarily how you get it done, but making sure you get it done is probably better when I talk about execution. So you can't do that in isolation. So effective leaders make sure that they are very knowledgeable at and including every level of the organization. So you don't set strategy in isolation, because if you set strategy in isolation, then when it comes to executing that strategy, you're going to fail. So you've got to include the whole organization in setting that strategy up and making sure that you set the right strategy, not just a strategy. And that goes hand in hand with the quote here by Edison, having a vision for what you want is not enough. Vision without execution is hallucination. So, again, you have to not do necessarily perfectly what you want to do, but what can be done. Organizational design. Just kind of recapping here, let's just pause. So 1 and 2 go hand in hand. Number 1, you need everybody to speak the same language. Some people are going to speak at a more fundamental language or basic language than others, but everybody needs to have some common core terminology across the organization, and that will be dependent upon each and every organization. And then you need to design the organization for information democracy, right? You need to be able to figure out how you're going to enable everyone within their jobs with the right analytics to get that job done better, to do a better job with the right information. And that could be automated decisioning, that could be dashboards, that could be deep data science. But again, the whole organization speaking data and acting upon data is the goal, and that leads the organization up for success. And the last point is, we've been layering now, right? So we started really kind of from more of the bottom, and now we're moving to the top with leadership. But again, leaders must engage the entire organization. I've said it, but I'll say it again. They should not create the strategy in isolation. If they do that, they're going to fail. A brilliant strategy is just worthless without execution. So I love this quote: if culture eats strategy for breakfast, then structure eats culture for dinner. And that's by Safi Bahcall. So I'm enamored. He's got some great stuff out there. And the bottom line is there's a definite difference between culture it takes a long time to set up. Structure is pretty low-hanging fruit. And so you can start with structure and then you can move towards culture. But let me just kind of go through an example of the difference and why it's so important. So, if you're in a small organization, you can really garner an atmosphere of team and shared values. I mean, if everybody wins together or they die together. So let's suppose as an example, you're part of a biotech startup with 10 people. And people work together because it's either everyone succeeds and becomes really wealthy, or everyone fails and you're out of the job. And so you're pretty much heavily invested, in that. Your contribution is vital to the whole. So your stake is in the outcome of the entire enterprise, and the enterprise must succeed, or you'll be out on the street. So, so contrast that to what happens if you're in an organization of 10,000 people, right? So first, typically in that size of organization, you've got a lot of different layers. You got staff, department managers, directors, senior VPs, vice presidents, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents. You got these fancy titles that are created to make everyone feel more important. But it's really easy to get lost in a large organization, and that's the reason all these layers and structures are created. And at the end of the day, rank matters, and it matters actually a great deal. So there are ways of structuring the organization that can improve your odds of getting everyone to contribute maximally, right? And so Safi goes through. And he defines these things called artists and soldiers and the different roles that they play. And so especially as you grow in an organization, if you're working with a larger organization, you need to separate these two role types out. And I'll provide as homework. If you're more interested in that topic, you should pick up his book called Loon Shots. It's a great book, Safi Bahcall. And it even goes in with the second tidbit there that I wanted to share. Celebrate your failures as well as successes. And the quote is, "For successful AI projects, celebrate your graveyard," by Sam Deep. That was a quote, and it actually ties back into that artists versus soldiers, because artists you allow to fail quite a lot. They take a lot of risks. It's where you're creating and you have a lot more flexibility, and a single failure doesn't mean everything. Versus your soldiers, if you're on a project timeline and you have to deliver, you need soldiers to manage that type of thing. So these first two quotes kind of go hand in hand. Something else I was going to say there. Maybe it'll come back to me. So the third point, and you can look this up, but I thought this was interesting. Google's Quest, they did a lot of research, and they did a lot of experimentation on developing the perfect team. And so these are the two bullet points that really separated great teams from not so great teams. The great teams had people that felt free and willing to talk up, and they also felt like they were listened to, that leadership believed that they had something to say and it mattered. And then the last point is back to that silos thing that I was talking about earlier. You really, in any organization, I mean, it's kind of hard to in a biotech of 10 people, but if you get any size, you should really consider some sort of matrix structure within the organization as far as structure. A center of excellence, a COE, is a good idea. I've been on COEs that were very effective, and then the other is a COP, which is a community of practice, and those can be quite beneficial as well. So we've kind of gone through here. So I'm just kind of repeating here, and again, you don't see a lot of technology so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology in the next few minutes, but the interesting thing is technology is a lot easier, quite honestly, than these organizational things, because technology selections are cut and dry, and because they're cut and dry, they're more objective, they're just easier. It's the squishier, softer stuff that's harder, and that often gets overlooked, and that's the reason that we need more of it. So I'm going to break down and talk about data for just a slide or two. You probably heard this, data is the new oil, but really, data itself is just really a cost. It's a liability. It takes money to source and clean up data. It takes money to keep it. It takes, money to secure it. Anybody heard of a data breach? That's a liability, right? When you got data sitting around. So literally companies are spending millions of dollars on this. And then if you look at the second bullet point there, right, after spending billions of dollars, 90% of that data is never even analyzed. So it sits there, maybe rolls off at some point, but a lot of money is spent for that. And so how do you turn the corner? Again, back to data literacy. You can monetize that data, which is a subject we won't go into. Certainly create and deploy analytics is something that probably is on everyone's mind on this call. So, and then again, technology is important, but knowledge trumps technology every time. And so again, that's one of the important points of places like Data Science Dojo, is helping you with that knowledge. So why is data so important? So it's really the cornerstone of improvement. You can't do any sort of improvement without data, right? And I could go into this for a long time, but I won't, because we're kind of running out of time. So I just have a few more slides, but you can't do any sort of improvement unless you know where you are and where you want to go, right? And whether you're in if you're at day 0 and then day 1, if day 1 is better than day 0, then you're improving. If not, you're staying the same or getting worse. So data is the cornerstone of improvement. And it's because data measures process, right? Any sort of data point that you have pretty much measures the process, and life is full of processes. I would almost argue that it's difficult to label something that's not a process. Everything from getting up out of bed in the morning to brushing your teeth to working out to, going to work, checking your email, every single one of those is a process. And you can capture data on almost every single one of those things. And so the problem with data is that, a lot of it's not collected. We need to collect the most meaningful data for the problems that we want to solve. And there is opportunity to be more data driven, certainly. And we have to collect the right data, because everybody's seen the data explosion where we have these exabytes now that are being collected of data, but are we collecting the right data? And I would argue that often we don't. So data considerations, the way I kind of break this out in the writing is that, from a very high level consideration, you have pipes, right? So you have pipes that carry the data, and those could be, part of the movement of data. So you could have, APIs, application program interfaces, you could have events, you could have microservices, you could have streaming, et cetera. And so that's all about the data movement. And then you park the data at some point, right? And those are in the data stores, the data warehouses, enterprise data warehouse, the big data, the data lakes, the cloud data, the reservoirs, et cetera. So that's kind of where you store. And then you kind of have a hybrid if you've run across data virtualization. And so again, I'm not going very deep. We have a whole section in one of the books about this this particular topic and best practice on how to do that. And then there's curated data where you can buy data, and then you should always, as a data scientist, you should always be thinking about next generation data. Well, and that's really twofold. Number one, you're solving problems today. What data do you need in hand to solve today's problems? But you should also be thinking about what data am I going to need tomorrow to solve tomorrow's problems, and what technologies are coming down the pipe to help me grab that data. I mean, again, some of these pipes that have become available make it so much easier now than it used to be to grab data. So that's a piece. And then in the end, you really need good data governance and data management programs, right? So you need to be able to make sure that that data is of the right quality, and you need, to make sure that it's ethically done, what you're storing, all the security protocols, that you're not storing data that you shouldn't have. So there's the liability from that standpoint, and then just keeping the data up to date with good data management. And then the analytics design for success, having all the right stack and tools and everything for what your business is doing, from the data discovery and acquisition, the visualization, all the exploratory data analysis, all the stats, the reporting, preparing the data, getting the data in the right format, imputation, whatever it might be there, and then feature engineering, finding those features relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve, and then obviously model build and model selection, then the evaluation and testing of that model, deployment, and then once you put it into production, you need that model into production, then you need model monitoring and governance. And of course, this is very circular and should be long-term planned, right? Back to that Netflix thing, you need to be sure that you can deploy that model. You need some sort of business case to go with all of this full flow, because if you don't, you could end up with a model that engineering cannot deploy, or it's too expensive to deploy, and does not return the ROI that your model would suggest that it would return. And of course, you have even the technical debt, that refers to the long-term cost associated with the models that you create, and the software engineering, the model dependencies, the data dependencies, and then back to, within the last few years, really a growing piece is the ethical and legal implications, right? So everything in healthcare from like HIPAA to GDPR, et cetera, making sure that you're within the realm there. And so this last slide is essentially I've talked a lot about the different stuff that we've written about. You'll see it's all analytics. Parts 1 and 2 on top. Those 2 books are out. The executive guide, which I refer to a lot on the creating the strategy, there's a lot of information there. We have a healthcare book coming out later. But if you want to connect with me, there's a few ways that you can do that, and they're listed here on LinkedIn or my website, or you can email me, or if you are interested in one of these books, you can just type in my name. It's very simple, Scott Burke, on Amazon, or I've got a channel with some content you might be interested on YouTube. So anyway, happy to support in any way I can.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Scott. I am going to share my screen really quick and talk about tomorrow's webinar before we answer some questions. And if you do have questions, please post them in Q&A. And I'm going to give you time to type those out now. So 1 minute while I share my screen. And Scott, if you could just let me know when you can see this so that I know everybody can see it.
Got it.
Perfect. So
I'm seeing the data science.
Yep. Perfect. So next week we have Neil Leiser with us. He's going to be taking us through an introduction to convolutional neural networks with TensorFlow. And so we're going to be talking about how they work mathematically. He's going to give us an intro to TensorFlow, and then we're going to build our own model for image classification using TensorFlow. So make sure if that's something that's interested tomorrow, July 20th, at 10 a.m. Pacific, we'll be doing that. And Neil is a data scientist at, I'm not sure if it's IWOCA or IWOCA. I hope it's IWOCA because that would be a really fun name to say over and over again. But they are a fintech startup, and he's a data scientist there. And Neil also hosts the AI Stories podcast, where he invites data professionals and tech leaders to talk about their careers and how they use AI in their day-to-day lives to impact our world. So make sure to join us tomorrow for that. And Scott, I am seeing one question. So feel free to, I'll read it out loud to you, but if you want to pull up your last slide again so that people can know how to connect with you and all that while we do this, that'd be great. So I am seeing one question from LS. And Scott, just let me know when you're ready, and I don't want you to have like your focus on two things.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So where does the data design happen? Is it in marketing or in data science or in some other department within the organization?
Sure. Yeah. So best practice probably would be, depending upon the organization, if you have a project team, or a program, that's really, if you're supporting a project, you want the data design to be there, right? So if you're familiar with like CRISP-DM, it's a methodology for machine learning, but part of it is it's a circular design, and it's getting the right data to support a project. Now, if you're trying to get your data design right for the overall organization, then that's a mixture of the business and IT. Overall the business, right? So you want to make sure, to that point of Dresner, that you want all the data to be available at the point of action. That's what you want. But does that help at all? I mean, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question in the right way or not.
I think so. I mean, I think, it kind of depends on the organization that you're working with, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's
it's a big question. Data design. I would say that there's fundamental data design. That's where you're determining what your technology is going to be. I mentioned data virtualization, which is kind of a hybrid of the data warehouse with all the APIs and all the events streaming in, right? So you don't have to have a physical data warehouse. It's actually where you create more of a logical data warehouse. That's data virtualization. Or whether you want to have and you can supplement an existing data warehouse to a data virtualization. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but a lot depends upon budget. There's a lot of factors. So yeah, it's a little difficult. Yeah,
for sure. And that's the only question I'm seeing for you, Scott. I know somebody in the chat was asking, where can they find the recording? It'll be on our YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, it'll be up there. And then if you did RSVP on our website, we'll make sure to send the recording to you via email. And it'll also be on our webpage on online.datasciencedojo.com. So there are kind of 3 places that I guess you can find it. And I'm sure our social media guy will share it across our social media channels. And then I'm getting another question in chat. This is from Maru. What is your experience and how do you deal with the lack of focus of teams in data science and machine learning when they work on customer value? I think that's
okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Scott,
so
if you may want to pull up the chat and
okay.
keep that one reading, because I think there's 2 parts to this question.
All right. Okay. Now, which one is this one?
Would be one of the most recent.
Ability of these AMI teams to work as a team. So really, I mentioned very briefly the Center of Excellence and Community of Practice, right? So I'm a strong believer in both of those. There's a difference between those two. So the Community of Excellence is where you essentially have a core, just like you'd have like IT, you'd have a core analytics, AI, data science team, right? So you'd have different people. Maybe you'd have some people that were great at visual BI. You'd have some statisticians. You might have some data scientists. You may have, other adjunct people there. So you create a core, and they're matrixed, though. They're matrixed with the business. So you have these teams working with, say, marketing. Marketing gets time across that centralized team, just like an IT department typically is. So it's kind of that model. So that is a Center of Excellence. And then there's a Community of Practice, which exists kind of outside the day job a little bit. I mean, you should be given time by the organization, should give you time to work as part of the Community of Practice. And that is a cross-functional and cross-role-based. So I was the leader, for example, I was a leader of a healthcare community of practice. And we had people across different roles, right? So we had people from across the organization. Some of those people were business people. Some of those people were more technical people. And they would come together and we would talk about best practices. And so it was a great way for the technologists to learn from the business and vice versa. So that was one of the things there. So the majority of AI and decision support teams rejecting agile philosophies. That to me is going to be a leadership problem, right? A management problem, because it sounds like, or at least my experience there is that there's not enough investment. There's not enough weight coming in from the top for that. So yeah, I would go to if that's it, I would would very diplomatically go through my boss and my leadership chain to see and address the problem there, because it's not something that typically, unless it's, you know, personalities or something which everybody can work at, it typically has to go up the chain before that can be resolved.
All right.
I'm reading as we're going through, so I see that it's part of it. Again, it's part of an education problem too, right? On what Agile is. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think that will do it for us today. So thank you so much, Scott, for being here and taking time out of your schedule to do this presentation for us. And thank you for everyone who joined, whether you're in Zoom or on one of our live streams. We appreciate you being here with us today. And if you are able to, make sure to join us tomorrow for that introduction to convolutional neural networks with TensorFlow. All right. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your days.